Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. In this episode, you'll hear our three head coaches, Jeff Alberts, Brad Loomis, and Alberto Nunez, discuss how they handle competition seasons when the show dates have to be altered or pushed back. Since this was recorded in the spring of 2020, we'll be discussing how we've rearranged a lot of our athletes' current protocols due to the pandemic and the contest postponements that have resulted from it. The guys also talk about how we elongate seasons for unexpected life events, when athletes simply aren't ready in time, or perhaps when they earn a pro card early in the year and now have to compete much later in that same season in order to maintain their pro status. So for whatever reason newer athletes might need to tweak game plans or stretch out a dieting phase, we think this podcast will be extremely useful. As always, if you have any feedback or comments on this episode, head on over to 3dmusclejourney.com or to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/team3dmj and leave it under podcast number 153. Let's get into it. Here is When Your Show Dates Move with Brad Loomis, Alberto Nunez, and Jeff Alberts.
Hey, what's up, guys? 3D Muscle Journey in the house, but aren't we all right now? And of late, that's kind of what we've been doing. We've been trying to, just find, through our coaching mostly, because chances are, if we're seeing a lot of this, there's a lot of people out there who are going through similar things that our athletes are dealing with right now. So a big one is the 2020 bodybuilding season, and how that's been delayed. Like right now, we were 2 months out from all getting together and catching up at the California Natural Muscle Mayhem, and that's just always been a tradition as long as I can remember. I think I've missed one, but that's not happening. A lot of shows are not happening, and I think I think you guys will probably confirm this, but in my case, a lot of my athletes, they're like, damn it, no, I started this, I'm going to finish it. And it really, that's a big deal to them. And I totally understand. I think I do the same thing in their shoes. So now the issue that presents itself is a lot of these athletes are getting ready for, early spring shows, summer shows. They're now competing later on in the year. So we're having to extend that prep and hold things together. Have you guys found the same thing, that a lot of your athletes that were supposed to compete right about now are like, okay, well, I'll just wait until there is a show I can compete in?
It's about a 50-50 mix, to be honest with you. Yeah, I'd say half of them are in that boat. They're like, damn it, I don't care what is thrown at me. I made up my mind I'm going to do this, and I will, come hell or high water, I'm going to get on stage. And then I'd say the other 50%, and I mean, I'm not going to blame them. They're like, just, nah, peace out. I'm good. Yeah. I gave it my best, and it wasn't in the cards, and I'm not, I know what I'm in for. I know what I signed up for. And if there's no light at the end of the tunnel, there's no finish line, I'm good. I'm not doing it, So yeah, at least for me, it's definitely a 50-50 kind of proposition for my competition prep athletes.
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of a mix. I've had some that are just, they're just troopers and they're continuing on, they're marching on. And I think just having that prep, regardless of, what the end date is going to be, it's something positive right now that they're gravitating towards. Because obviously it's can be a depressing time that we're in right now. So just having something like that to focus on is an outlet. But I've had some that, just life just kind of getting the best of them. So the prep, it becomes more of a stressor than something that's actually making things better for them. So in those instances, I think that's the wise decision. If you're experiencing a tremendous amount of stress outside the gym and it's really impacting how your ability to do a prep, then it's the wise choice to just shut things down. So it's kind of a mixture. And obviously now, I mean, with the season being postponed and shows being, kind of pushed towards the fall, the trajectory for those who are prepping, obviously the preps are being extended out. So that's something I think all three of us have had to try to figure out for athletes is, how do we approach that, and what's the timeline look like, and, what kind of calls we're making with that. For me personally on my roster, luckily I didn't have anybody that was really competing in the spring. So I was fortunate enough there that I didn't really have to make any adjustments for people. But a lot of my athletes were looking at the Muscle Mayhem in July, and now it's postponed to October. So for some of them, it's kind of a positive because, having that time is a luxury. Like now we can have a little bit broader playbook. So it's actually a positive. But for some others, though, I can say that like the ones that are like really ready by July or ready even early, then that can be troublesome too, because now we have to extend these timelines out with a leaner body. That's kind of more or less what I've been working with as a coach as of the last couple of months.
One of the most frustrating things is that all my experience in some ways just kind of has gotten thrown out the window. So usually, like, I have an answer from most anything. It's like, okay, no, get your poly done at this time. Say no to that tanning time. That's going to be a pain in the butt. You know what? Like, okay, maybe your show schedule, let's spread it out this way, right? But in this case, there was a period there where the athletes were like, so what do I do, coach? What do you think about this show? And I'm like, dude, I've never been through anything even remotely close to this. And it's really frustrating for me that I don't have the answers. The only thing I can do, and this is, I guess, kind of how I've framed it for myself when it comes to structuring out the plan, is just thinking of it as like a season where you compete like basically from spring until like November, which is something it's not a road that's traveled very often because it's hard. It's usually something that's better left off for like veterans of the sport, people who kind of know the ins and outs of how to pace things, how their body responds to things. That's like how I've had to frame it in my mind. And I'm like, outside of that, like, it's like, hey, we're just going to have to like kind of sit here, wait and pace and just try to, I guess, stay ready and not be caught off guard. So that's been really frustrating, is the fact that I don't have as many answers as I'm typically accustomed to having.
Yeah, what's kind of cool for me though is like last year, like my season was extended out. Like that was a super long season and I was lean for a very long time. So I have some personal experience there with that. But I also had another athlete, and of course I'm advanced, and the athlete I'm going to talk about is advanced as well. So he did 6 shows, and his season, I think it was from like May all the way till October or somewhere in there. And mine was roughly kind of similar. It was like first show in July, ended in November. So it was a long stretch. And what I found with him was that kind of same thing with me. Like the longer you're in an extreme state of leanness, it's very hard to maintain a healthy and full looking physique the entire time. So that's the biggest challenge that that I faced personally last year. And looking in hindsight, I even had a conversation with Eric on this, that in the future, it's like probably have to just work within a shorter window of like that striking distance of hitting shows up when you're at your peak, because the longer you extend it out, the harder it's going to be. So yeah, I mean, it's like right now it's an open book. Like I'm kind of same boat with you, Berto. It's like, how do we manage this with a lot of people, because there's different experience levels with each athlete. Someone who's like really green, first time competing, it's like, yeah, you don't want to have them lean too far in advance, because it's going to be super hard for that person to hold it. Just from a mental standpoint, not so much from a physical. The physical is tough, but the mental is more the hard thing. So that's kind of the challenges. So it's hard because we don't know like the dates of all these shows. I think more or less what I'm kind of figuring is that a lot of these shows are, if they're going to happen, they're going to happen in the fall. So I'm thinking, okay, September, October, November is more or less the window that we're probably working with a lot of these athletes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there, Jeff. It's harder to maintain that lifestyle and that physique mentally, than it is physically. I mean, physically, yes, it's tough, but I always equate it to, kind of like how much volume do you need to maintain your muscle? It's not quite as much volume as you need to actually progress and grow new muscle, right? It's in my experience when I've extended seasons and when I've had people say, "Oh man, that was great. I want to do one more show. I want to do one more show." I mean, we've always kind of dealt with that, right? It's easier to maintain the physique than it is to get there. You sometimes got to get there, and it's hard, and you got to really dig, and sometimes you got to dip dough really low in calories and keep that expenditure up. But once you're there, you can kind of get those calories to come up a little bit. You can kind of cruise just a little bit. And that, like Jeff said, that's good for a certain period of time. Because even last year, Jeff, you got down there pretty lean, but you just kept getting harder and harder and harder and harder until it was just like, you know what, the physique's going downhill now. You get to that edge to where you're out of that window and you just start getting worse.
There was probably a 2-month window where I was like, this is my peak. This is where I'm looking my best. And then, like you said, as I tried to push things further because I was trying to get to Worlds, it just kept like not looking as impressive. I mean, I still look okay, but I wasn't looking as good as I was earlier in the season. So it just got harder and harder. And the thing that kind of kept me going was that I had these little pit stops, these little mini goals along the way, like guest posings and all these things that kept me going. But if I didn't have that, like if I was just, let's say someone who's in their first or second season or whatever, you don't have these guest posing spots, or you don't have these other little goals you have in between shows, and you got a 2 or 3 month stretch in between a show, and you got to try to hold the peak. Mentally, it's hard to live that lifestyle because, more or less, we're hungry at that point. You're extremely lean. You're hungry. Your training's much harder. Everything's intensified. Life stressors are intensified. So it's a big ask to have people stay that condition for that long. So it's super important, I think, for us now as coaches, like to kind of look at the timeline and trajectory of people, their circumstance, and kind of in what you're dealing with as far as, okay, can this person hold conditioning, and for how long can they do it? How long do I think they can hold it for? And, if I have, let's say, maybe a 4-month window, what's the trajectory going to look like in that 4-month window or 5-month window? Do I need to push them hard now, get some conditioning, or, hey, let's back off now, pick it back up? So those are the questions that and answers I've been trying to work on with each person. Right now it's hard to say just because I never know what the show date is.
Yeah, that's kind of my experience too. That's like 2-3 months. That's kind of like the window. Once you start getting longer than that, like we said, mentally, it just starts getting more and more unhealthy. And it's kind of like why we always talk about you shouldn't live your life in competition shape, because you can't mentally sustain that. You start getting very unhealthy, just mindsets, unhealthy relationships with food. Like even my one client he was ready. He was ready right when they pulled the plug on all these shows and the economy and closed everything down, right? He was ready. And these last couple months, he's just like, food focus is getting worse. Food focus is getting worse. And the challenging thing is it's like, we just had to flip the switch all of a sudden, because all of a sudden it was like, okay, the economy's open. This show's going to happen in June. And I was like, oh, wow, really? And so we had to really kind of make like an emergency, coach client meeting and say, okay, how are we going to approach this? So yeah, that's kind of my experience. 2-3 months, even myself, I want to say 4 months was too long, because I tried doing a show way back when, and I kind of had a good peaking season from like late June until August. And then I tried to do a show in October, and it was a mess. So I'd say that, yeah, that's kind of the window. You don't really, like Jeff experienced last year. If you do go that long, it's doable. You look decent, but you're just not very happy with yourself and the product that you put on stage in comparison to what you did look like even a month earlier?
All sports have that, they understand that well. If you're a sprinter, it's like, hey, you can hit your peak, but just know it's this long. If you're a powerlifter, for example, it's like, okay, you did a meet today, maybe you shouldn't do that next meet like in 8 weeks. Like we understand this. And with like bodybuilding, since it's not a performance sport, I think people are like, well, how? But it I guess it is in an indirect way, in that like your body's just not performing correctly. Like things just aren't working on the insides as well as they should be, and eventually that does start to show on your physique. So, I think what we should go over a bit is you briefly touched on this, Brad, is like the strategies we've been using. Maybe because we all have athletes who have had kind of different, they come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different situations in regards to like where their show was, where they are shape wise, and we've had to take slightly different approaches with everyone, and even like where are they located, right? So, let's go over just a few different scenarios, because there might be someone out there who's like, hey, like that's freaking me. Okay, like maybe I should, try a little bit of what they're doing with their people. So, did anyone have someone who's just peeled out their mind like way too early?
Yeah. My guy Phil, he was ready. He was ready early for his show in like March or April. You guys have seen him. He's been lean. He's been peeled for a long time. Luckily, he's my only one that's like that. And it's been a challenge. He's the one that I was just referring to that's been, gosh, just getting a little bit more food focused, and a little bit more, God, I got to have, the most tasty food that I can get from my macros, and the strategy's pretty, luckily for Phil, we worked together so long that I know how that guy ticks. I mean, at this point, I don't need to know what that guy's calories are. I can just watch what his weight does from week to week to week to week, and I'll know what he's eating. That's the big value of long-term working with a client like that, is how they tick. But with him, what we had to do is we it was kind of like we might have a show pop up at any time. So we couldn't get leaner, but at the same time, we couldn't really afford to backslide too terrible much on conditioning, So because I knew him so well, I was able to say, okay, this is probably what your metabolic rate is and probably what calories are for maintenance at this body weight. Let's just go a little bit above that. Luckily, he's a pretty anal guy. He scrapes all the crumbs off of the table and gets them all into the napkin and then puts all the crumbs into the garbage, And so
That's
he's
my
pretty
guy.
good.
He recycles a napkin too. Yeah. Just like that.
So yeah, we were just able to kind of calculate that maintenance, just go a little bit above that. And luckily his physique has been, pretty darn predictable. It's kind of like we can just see a little bit of fading here. He gained a couple of pounds, and then he ironically was the one that we just had to flip. Oh, there's a show going to be in June. We got 6 weeks, And so, yeah.
So you guys
we were
actually
able to-
deconditioned him a little bit. Like you guys mutually agreed on like, hey, let's put on just a little bit. And let's not get to those gnarly places where, all that stuff starts to happen.
Exactly, yeah. And we had actually done that before. We had actually come to a spot where it was a planned tie-up break that we had long before we even started the prep, to where we kind of knew how much food to give him to get him to gain, say, a pound over 3 weeks, right? So we had kind of already done it before, and we had a little bit of experience, and that was kind of what we did. And to use his term, he's like, okay, let's put a stake in the ground, like right here, so we know where to find. And then let's kind of come back to that, when we're ready. So that's luckily been, the one client that was like ready and then no show, The other one, actually, I take it back. I had two. I had another one that was ready. But it was kind of one of those things where for that one, it wasn't in the cards. Competing was not in the cards. It was like, you know what? Unfortunately, I can't do it. Plus, it was way early in the season. It was, we knew that there was not going to be a show on the horizon anytime soon. That athlete had plans like right after the show, like important, kind of like life-changing type plans. So it just was not in the cards. And that's pretty easy. That you just start recovery right then at that point. But yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned that, Brad.
I had a guy peeled, ready to go,
Because someone out there probably went through that where they had to can their prep and they're probably feeling like really guilty and bad about that. And here's like this person who has like some of the best help you can get like in the world in regards to this specific sport. And between both of you guys, you decided that, this is probably the best thing to do. So I can think of many scenarios, like such as the one you just went over, where the best thing is probably just like, hey, let's just leave it here. Let's not get ourselves into like any like added trouble, and just can just start our next off season. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm sure many preps were ended like prematurely this year.
Yeah. And luckily that one was a pretty healthy ending. That athlete was like, this is the best I've ever looked. I far surpassed my conditioning in past competitions. I'm good. It's not my fault. It's not like I quit. This was totally out of my control. I'm good with just kind of letting this go. So it was a very healthy ending to the prep as well.
I think for some that have to quit, it's probably the right reasons, just because of the life stress. Sometimes that's more inspiring to shut it down, knowing that's the best thing for you, versus trying to persevere and just amplify your stress levels to a point where it becomes unhealthy. But it's hard for people that do quit but feel guilty because of it, like they're failing in a way. And I've had one athlete that basically has a ton of potential, like a ton, and he had to shut it down just because it just was too much. You factor in, we have other life stressors we're already dealing with, and prep amplifies that a little bit. And then you throw a pandemic in the mix. So this gentleman basically had to shut it down. And I can tell there was a sense of like guilt, or like they feel like they're failing. So it was more or less like, hey, you're not failing. This is, if anything, under the circumstances, you've done extremely well up to that point. Like, we were killing the prep up to that point. And you just put another notch on your belt as far as experience.
Yeah.
So everything that you're learning, that you have learned up to this point, you're going to be able to take that moving forward. And so the next time you get in a prep, which will probably feel like nothing, like it's probably not going to feel half as stressful as things are now. He's going to be super successful at that point. But I think even I've had preps where, like, obviously the one I failed in 2018, it was just like, I knew it was the right thing to do was to quit, but it just felt like a failure because you didn't get to the quote unquote, end zone. You didn't get to that day that you're supposed to get on stage. So it felt like a failure. But, after a little time passed, I realized that was the best thing for me. And as you guys know, 2019 was a great year for me. And if it wasn't for that experience I had where I had to kind of shut things down, I don't think I would have been as successful. So there's always, like, the way I kind of look at it is those types of people that have to kind of shut things down. It's more or less turn it into a positive. It's not a negative. And it's, I kind of look at things as a half glass full. So that's one experience I've had with one of my athletes that I had to kind of coach him through that. Another athlete I had wasn't as lean as Brad's guy, but we were getting pretty peeled, pretty close. And his show was in May. And we knew that was going to get postponed. So we shut things down about a month or so ago. And what we did was we just basically said, okay, we're just going to basically take, all days now to refeed numbers. And we're going to cap your body weight, under 70 kilos. So in a sense, I was just going to try to have him have more food in there. Obviously, more food is going to help his training, get a little weight put back on him, just kind of, cure all those things we start to feel with prep, the hunger, the energy levels and all that, like get all that kind of ironed out. And, sure enough, after a week or so, he's already starting to feel better. Training started to improve. Recovery was improving. physique looks fuller, not as hard, but looks fuller. But he's in a good place now where he can hold on to the conditioning he has now, and we can start that prep back up. So we're planning to start that prep up in the beginning of June, because the show's going to be in the fall. So in a sense, you could kind of look at what the work we did before shutting things down was kind of like the diet before the diet, in a sense. Got him into a good place to start back up. So that's kind of one of the strategies I took with that guy was just, okay, let's just get him out of the prep environment, feed him, don't overfeed him, but feed him enough to where he's feeling good and have him at a good, fairly lean body weight where we can start the prep back up in a productive way.
Dope.
How about you, Bert? You had anybody that was just peeled, ready to go?
Yeah, so back in 2011, I decided to run this marathon prep, and I remember exactly what that was like. And I'm like, I'm never doing this again.
I remember that.
Yeah. Speaking of like bad relationships, I was in a toxic relationship with fat-free Pringles, and those of you who remember what that does, it was, at a certain point, it's if you're having trouble going and you get yourself a can of fat-free Pringles, it'll do the job. So I just remember that was too much for me I kind of knew what I was getting into, but I wanted to do the Muscle Mayhem because that was going to be that was where I had won my pro card the season before. So I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna do that show in July. I'll pick up some shows even before that, and then I'll make it all the way until like the very last show of the year. And I remember at a certain point, I'm just like, I'm never doing this again. Like it's, I'm just gonna pick like you said, Brad. Like, you know, a window, 2 to 3 months sounds pretty reasonable of like being in peak shape, and just no more than that, you know.
So that prep, because we were both kind of on the same timeline. So the difference is though, like for you, like you lose fat relatively easily in comparison to, let's say, me. So for me, I needed a lot of that time to actually get to the place where I could actually get on stage. Whereas you get ready fairly quickly and quick for you. And basically, you know, you have to hold that state for such a long period of time. So I remember, you were just like, this is way too long. I remember that. So that's kind of like, I think that's a difference with certain body types too. Yeah. As far as the length of preps.
I remember, you were posing me June, and I was already like in good enough shape by then. And guess what? We ended it was right before Halloween. So we're never doing that again. But it, I thought I was ready for it, and I had my head on like pretty straight at that point when it comes to, how I, figured all this stuff out, and the coping and the being able to just continue living your life in the most effective way possible while being a hyper-focused athlete. But that was a lot more than I thought it was going to be. So with my athletes,
I mean, hopefully I'm not getting overly personal. Like, how was it for you as far as, like, you held that condition, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, we can look at the photos and all that and go, hey, great job. You're shredded the whole time. You did well in the shows, but what was life like for you outside the gym? Like, looking in hindsight now, this is like almost 10 years later now. Like, what was life like? What was the quality of life like? Because I don't think that's talked about a lot. Like, everybody wants to hear about, hey, the protocols need to be this is the timeline, yada, yada, yada. But we got to talk about we're all human and how we go about executing protocols and timelines. That's really key as far as how it impacts life. So how was that for you?
Yeah, I was selling my body for Pringles, basically. that's what we got to. I just felt trapped, man. That was probably the biggest thing. It was just like life had lost a lot of its randomness, and a little bit of that I kind of like, to just kind of put everything away, and just focus on your goal, like in the right dosage, like that's fine. But the biggest thing to me is just like, man, I can't just like go out on a whim, be like, that's happening this weekend, let's go do that, and let's go do that. Like that was done. I couldn't stay up like past a certain time because, hey, it's like, hey, bro, you have cardio, and if you have a bad night's sleep, it really impacts you at this point. So it was just too much of that. I mean, again, like it completely slipped my mind that that's right. When you do this, you're going to have to be a monk for like a few months. So
there was no break. Like for us, when we like in normal circumstances, when we program some season, and let's say they're trying to, let's say qualify for Worlds, so they have, let's say, a summer show, then they got to hold conditioning all the way to November. Like we know, okay, we're going to diet break this person, allow them to gain a little bit of weight back, and then restart the prep. Kind of like the gentleman I just mentioned prior. But for you and I back then,
we didn't do that.
We didn't do that. We were just like straight through because we were doing show after show after show. So like for people now that are kind of trying to figure out, hey, what's the best approach and game plan now? Well, it's so hard to say because there's no specific dates you're shooting for as of yet.
Yes.
So that's the big challenge with a lot of people is like, okay, do I diet break them or do I keep prepping them through? How do I go about this? So for me, I've been kind of like micromanaging week to week, like kind of try to figure out, okay, what state are these people in? If like I'm continuing to prep them without a date, then I'm really paying attention to, all these things that are impacting them, energy levels, hunger, performance, stressors, life stuff. Like, and if I feel like, hey, we need to pull back a little bit, then we'll pull back. But it's more just like, in a sense, auto-regulating.
And that's all you can do because, the world's changing every week. It's like, okay, so like now this is where we're at. So that definitely impacts your prep. And it's been exactly that way. It's like those, like not every, sometimes a good chunk of a prep should be like pretty non-eventful where it's like, hey, look, we're nailing this. Like, all right, let's, keep going. Let's keep going. But right now it's more like every check-in's like, all right, how are we doing? All right. And what have we found out in regards to, the logistics of your potential shows. So yeah, it's been week by week. One thing that I've this hit me the other day was the fact that a lot of these shows are just being postponed. Like these promoters still want it to happen. So if there is some good news is that once most places are in the clear to at least be able to put on these competitive events, fans, no fans, but hey, you'll have a place to compete. Once we get to that point, fans,
there's gonna be a lot of shows.
It's probably like moms and dads, right, and like pissed off like significant others, so they won't have to go. But yeah, there's gonna be a lot more shows, Brad. Exactly, like they're all going. So you're going to have a lot of options on the other side, which is something to it might look kind of empty right now, but like in another 2-3 months, it's gonna be like pretty overloaded, I feel.
Yeah, that's exactly what I conveyed to a few of my athletes. It's like, okay, once things do open up, where do I go? And I'm like, what? At this point, don't really worry about it because there's only so many weekends to have shows from like September 1st until the end of the year. You're going to have the pick of your litter. There's going to be probably 2 and 3 shows like every weekend. Because, there's so many shows that have been postponed that a lot of them have to be canceled. Because how can you have 3 shows on the same weekend in California, or how can you have 4 shows all in the Phoenix, Glendale area on the same weekend? You can't do it. Some of those are going to need to be canceled, or if you're lucky enough, move it to the following weekend. So that's kind of a nice thing is that, yeah, when things do finally open up, which I feel confident they will. They may not in every single state, but I feel somewhere things are going to be open and you're going to get the pick of your litter pretty much.
Really quick favor, guys. If you enjoy these shows and have been a listener for quite some time, we would really, really, really appreciate it if you could take the time to give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever your preferred podcast app may be. Having lots of ratings and audience feedback makes our show become more visible across multiple platforms, and it supports our mission of helping as many people as we can to be the best athletes, coaches, and lifting enthusiasts that they could possibly be. So if you're not driving and wouldn't be dangerous, pause this thing right now and give us an honest review over on your podcast app, and we would love you even more than we already do. Thanks for taking the time, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Has someone had an athlete where like the added time has helped? Because it's like, hey, you're kind of a stubborn case, and guess what? Like now you get to, I guess, work in an environment where you're not like feeling like you're getting suffocated by your deadline anymore? Have we had those?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, for sure. I've had quite a few actually, and yeah, it's like a blessing in disguise. You're like,
Right,
okay,
right.
I got more time now. Now we have more time to actually get a little bit leaner. So instead of like prior would be like, okay, we're gonna have to make sure we're like super on point, and we're probably gonna have to expedite things and kind of maybe nudge them along faster than I would like. So now it's like, okay, I can pull back. Like I said, my playbook's a lot broader now. I got more play calls I can make. So a little more refeeding, diet breaks now maybe are a thing that we can do. So the end product, I think, will be a little bit better. And the analogy I like to use is like, if you're kind of pressed for time, so let's say I give you 10 seconds to tie your shoes, you might get it done. But to think of the environment you're in doing that, it's going to be super stressful. You're going to be rushed. Whereas if I give you 45 seconds, I mean, yeah, you're going to be able to do it, with no issues at all. And your shoes are going to look prettier doing it that way. So basically, yeah, that's kind of more or less. I have a lot of athletes in that situation now where it's like, okay, cool. Now we have this extended timeline now where, hey, we can have a lot more options here. And the prep doesn't have to be so invasive. And I think that's super important. It's not just with like a pandemic prep, but just prep in general. Like the more time you have, the better off you're going to be. And especially for like, quality of life outside of the bodybuilding. So you have just more options as far as like life balance too, which I think is super important.
Yeah, rushed work definitely looks rushed. Like we've seen it up there on that stage. Yeah.
I've been there. It doesn't look or feel too pretty. I look like one of those Chuck Taylor shoes that have holes in the sides and shit. Shoe unlaces are untied. That was me back in the early 90s.
Yeah, and it seems like it never fails. As much as we talk about giving yourself plenty of time, getting ready early, we talk about that all the time. It seems like it never fails that every year we end up having, sometimes through no fault of their own, sometimes just through lack of exposure to kind of our position stands on a lot of things. We always end up having those few athletes that we got to rush, and yeah, that's been the same thing here. Some of these folks that needed to, drop 25 pounds in 20 weeks and, they had to drop 15 pounds in 10 weeks and things like that. And we kind of came out the gate and we're going guns blazing, pedal to the metal, 10 seconds to tie your shoe. It was kind of like the clock slowed way down. It was like that every second to tie your shoes was taking like 5 and 10 seconds, and all of a sudden, yeah, it was like we kind of fell into a more ideal timeline, and as a result, a lot of these folks are already, kind of looking to be, their heaviest on stage. They're looking to have a physique right now where they're a little bit more muscular than they had anticipated being. And I think that's just all a result of having more time that's, kind of been blessed upon us.
It's kind of like having an open-ended prep. That's more or less, I love those type of preps where there's no specific end date. Hey, let's just go through the process. And when you start looking more the part, then select the show dates. So in a sense, that's kind of what we're looking at here now, in a way. Like we know more or less, okay, the timeline's probably going to be in the fall, but it is like having more time now. It just mimics more like an open-ended prep. The good thing is like, yeah, it's a not a stressful environment to prep in. But on the flip side, without a specific end date, then people can get a little too relaxed. And yeah, then you start to lose a little bit of progress just because there's no urgency there. So there is a little fine line there with all that.
Yeah, it's just like being lean for too long. There's a certain window that pretty soon is going to close. And it's kind of the same thing with an open-ended prep. Eventually, you've got to have that date so that you can actually plan, this is what needs to happen every single week, and it will help you stay on task with the things that we need you to do in order to make that deadline. Without that, sometimes that open-ended prep will be a never will be,
Yeah, that's basically what happened with my last prep. It was right around beginning of May or so. That's when I said, hey, Eric, all right, hold me accountable. because there needed to be a little bit of urgency at that point if I was going to make that July date, that Mayhem show. So yeah, I had to step things up a little bit. So yeah, I was giving myself a little too much time to tie those shoes.
You know what? I actually had an athlete recently who it was too much uncertainty. So what we ended up agreeing on was like, hey, let's have a photo shoot, and let's get ready for that. And I personally don't buy a whole lot of show pics just because I don't know. It's just kind of boring, I guess, right? Every once in a while, I think I bought one last season where I'm like, okay, this one's good. They got everything right. I like the angle. I like how the lineup looked. I want that one. But, I got Brandon, our homie Brandon, to come down here and shoot myself, Evan Godby, and Brian Miner. And to me, I was like, that's kind of a bigger deal in some ways because there's something more. A lot of this bodybuilding is like, self-expression in a way, right? It's like art meets sports. Yeah. So it was cool to have, to just take that angle with your physique and have some shots to remember your efforts by that just really, I guess, show more than just your physique, but more so, I guess, to me, a big thing is and Brandon's so good at this, is like he kind of just intuitively knows how it is that like I want that to be like remembered or how I want that to be seen. So you get yourself a good photographer, like, man, you'll be like, I love some of my personal pics like outside of the stage, like way more than like I think the majority of my stage shots, like to be honest.
Yeah. I threw that out there to a few of my athletes, and a couple were on board with that, and the other were like, that's not going to motivate me enough. What eventually would end up having the ones that were like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. There was two of them. One of them, cool, yeah, let's do it. Hopefully the show's opened up by then. And the other one was just like, the photographer's way too expensive, and it's just not enough for me to keep going. Like it wasn't enough of a motivator for them. But I can say personally, in my experience, give more props to Brandon, of course. Like 2014, the black and white photo, the hands on hip. Like to me, that just captured that entire season. Just because that was like the best physique I ever had at that point, and he captured it perfectly. So like even now I look back on that, I'm like, damn, like I created that. That's crazy. So I think, yeah, if anything, it's not a bad idea to schedule a shoot just in case. Like the shows might say, hey, fall, but if it cancels out and you are in the condition like Brad's guy is, Phil, then shit, capture that moment. That's a trophy.
Remember that time we had that one eccentric photographer, Jeff, and you just he was shooting me and you just took over and you told him how to.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, I'm gonna do leg extensions while doing some dumbbells, an overhead press, and a chain around my neck. I'm like, bro, like, no, that's
yeah. Let's take all that stuff off, and here, let's shoot the picture from this angle, and yeah. So, and I'm not.
That was your photo shoot, yeah.
But I've been around bodybuilding long enough to know, okay, what's going to look good at different angles, yeah.
And Jeff, if I'm not mistaken, that picture that you're talking about of you is right over your left shoulder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't that the one right back there?
See?
That just goes to show you never know when you're going to get that perfect picture that is going to be timeless, that you're going to probably use for a multitude of uses for who knows how long. And there's the sample of it right there.
Yeah, I mean, like, no one's going to know, hey, what show that was or whatever. Like, no one's going to care about that. But yeah, I mean, when you look at the picture, I mean, people are going to say, okay, yeah, that took hard work. That's crazy. That's freaky or whatever. And it doesn't matter what place. No one's going to know. So to me, it's like, yeah, if you're in great shape like that, or if you're not all the way there yet, it could serve as a good motivator, something positive to shoot for with all the uncertainty that's going on right now.
And that shot wasn't on stage.
No, that was in my gym in the garage. Andrea was there when we captured that. And what's crazy, I was flat.
But yeah, that just goes to show you, if nothing else, that's your motivation right now. You might capture that timeless picture that you're going to use over and over and over again as just a snapshot in time of all your hard work and effort captured just right there in that one moment.
Yeah, because up to that point, that captured what, 30 years right there, or 28 years, whatever it was at the time. It just captured all those years in that one shot. Like that, to me, when I look at that, that's what it basically, it's an example of. Just the entire journey, just that one shot. So to me, if I like right now, because I'm not prepping because I'm in my off season, but if it was a pandemic and I was prepping, I probably would, depending on where I was at in the process. Like if I was just starting out and the pandemic hit, I would probably say, all right, shut it down. We'll do it next year. But if I'm like halfway into the process or 3/4 of the way through, I would finish it. I would go and finish it. And if there's shows I can do, great. If not, then hey, I'm going to get someone like Brandon to capture the moment and go back into an off season, because you're still going to learn a ton about yourself. You're going to learn about bodybuilding, you're learn about life, etc., going through the process till the end. Of course, you want to do it in a safe way, obviously.
Those shots, I think, are much, because a lot of our people are in the fitness industry. Like when it comes to marketing, like, stage shots just aren't as good as I think some people think. Like you could do other things that I think would help with building your brand if that's part of the reason you do this. One more case study that I think we haven't talked about, and that's and this kind of directly conflicts with what Brad said earlier, but I'll tell you why we have to take this route, and that's because so anyone who's competed, there's always this last leg where it's just like, holy crap, this feels like the fourth quarter, like you have nothing left, but it's so close at the same time, right? So it's that wall, and that's when like, hey, numbers might get a little funny. It's like you don't tell anyone your macros because they'll be worried for you. The amount of cardio you might be doing, gets pretty high up there, and this is especially the case with females. So I had this one young lady where we were about to get there, and the shows were kind of like flickering. It's like, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And then as soon as we find out, well, let's try to figure this out as soon as we can, because you're about to enter that place, and I don't want you to have to go through that wall and then decondition you and then have to go through that wall again, because in 1 year, that is, your little brain's going to remember that. So basically we caught that on time, and it's like, okay, so now what we're going to do is I don't care if you get a little softer, because we weren't at that place yet. It was right before we were digging, if you will. So we caught it right before and just kind of stabilized her there. And if anything, we were at this point, we're okay with the weight trending in the other direction, but it was right before we were below her set point, I guess, and had to go through all that nasty part. So in some cases, I think especially with women, if you can catch them right now before that, I think with dudes, sometimes the answer is yeah, just go through, fill them up, and as long as you don't leave them hanging there too long. Or what Brad did is you can decondition them and they can kind of go back and forth, and it's a little bit easier. But with females, sometimes what it takes to get those lines in your legs that basically every division does ask for, that's just a whole lot of work. And to do that twice in a season, that's the equivalent of in our own way, of an NFL player playing in the European League and in the NFL in the same year. It's dude, you are wrecked after that. So that was, we were lucky enough that we got enough. We were told ahead of time that okay, your June show is now going to be practically a late summer show. So work to our advantage, and we'll only have to strike once, basically.
Yeah, that was. I have to open up and disclose a little bit. That athlete that I was talking about before that just called it good, right there at that point. That was also a female, and I have to selfishly say I was kind of thankful because she had to push really hard, to get to that point. And she was only about 3 weeks out when they decided to just shut everything down, And like you said, Bert, especially with females, I think it's just because they tend to be smaller humans. You lose, you can lose that so quickly and so easily, and then it's almost kind of like pushing a car up the hill. It's if it's going, you're okay. You can keep it going, but as soon as you stop and let that car start sliding backwards, holy shit, it's going to probably run you over, and it's going to take a monumental effort to get that car going back up the hill again. And so, yeah, selfishly, I was like, oh, thank God I'm not going to have to ask her to do these monumental things, to get back to where we were. And yeah, I mean, I'll admit that's kind of selfish of me, but at the same time, I felt like that ended up being better for that client. You know what I mean? I felt like that was the healthy thing to do with that client. Because yeah, like you said, Bert, it's just to get to that level is such hard work, and to have to ask somebody to do that 2 or 3 times, not even with a guarantee that you're going to be there.
Yeah.
You might work twice as hard and still not get back there. Oh my Lord, that would just be crushing.
That happened to me. I'm not a female, but that shit happened to me back in 2000. I think I peaked for that year, like May, June. And then I stopped. Actually, it was like, May. I did a show in May. I basically stopped dieting for about a few days. And then I was like, okay. And I gained I ate a lot and I gained some weight. But I tried to start it back up. And I got to the Mayhem, which was Cap City at the time. And I did not look good at all. Like, it was just a struggle, and my body just wasn't responding. And I wasn't cheating on my diet or anything like that. I was doing the same things I was doing prior. Just my body just was like, you're done. And it just wasn't a good experience. So looking in hindsight, I could look back and go, man, how did I even get through that? Because I remember it was just a struggle mentally to stay on the diet, like to restart and go again. I did it, but it just wasn't the same as the first go around. So it's kind of like Berto said, like, to ask an athlete to do that twice, this is crazy.
Yeah, and I really lucked out in 2011 when we were all prepping that season that you guys were talking about earlier, because remember, we all went to Kansas City. I can't remember the exact day that was, but that was in the fall. And remember, on the way back from that Kansas City show, I was in a bit of a depression and a bit of a funk, and I had my 10,000 calorie day, eating from Kansas City all the way back here to Portola, California. But I lucked out in that, first of all, the window hadn't closed yet. And remember, that little bit of a diet break was what got me looking what I feel is still my best ever look to this day. And that was the Natural Olympia, which was, I think it was November, if I remember right, in 2011. Because remember, you guys were both done. I think you guys had both done the Yorton. Bert, you had done the lights, and I think Jeff was in the middles. And everybody was done, and everybody came here and stayed at my house, and we all went to the Natural Olympia. And I still feel to that day, other than we got the dream tan all over my freaking trunks, color, fullness, conditioning. I mean, Bert was right there to kind of put the finishing touches on the peak. To this day, I feel like that was the best I ever looked. And it was partially, I feel like I was ready for that show in Kansas City. Just got my ass handed to me by much more gifted athletes. But, through all of that backsliding and kind of call it metabolic repair, call it whatever, it kind of set me up for a pretty good time period all the way in November when your guys' season was done. And I just had to get that one last little kick on that last straightaway before I hit the finish line.
Man. So, yeah, no, it's been an interesting season, and I think a learning experience for everyone, not just the athletes. And it's been like double the learning experience for the athletes because, man, I have so many athletes who were so pumped like midway last year for this year. And, we had it all planned out, and we're like, okay, this time we're going to nail it. And, we had prep before together, and then, this happened. So it's been quite humbling, but like we're all learning, not just the athletes, but us as well. And it's definitely been a few feathers in my cap to like go through this. I hope I never have to go through this again with my athletes, but yeah, it's been enlightening for sure. And just when you think like, most everything, it's like something like this happens and it's like, oh, okay, that's right. Like you're really only just barely over a decade into the coaching anyways.
It's all new territory.
Yeah.
To actually have a season where you're like, we don't know what the shows are. It's all on the fly. So that's why I'm relying more on the week-to-week check-ins and having like open dialogue, open conversations, because it's just too hard to predict the trajectory right now like it is in a normal season. So that's challenging. I think what's cool is that we're all very open and honest that, hey, we don't have all the answers. We're basically feeling our way through it. But I will say I'm pretty confident that all three of us, we have a ton of history as far as experience from past history that obviously we're talking about it, that we're utilizing to manage these athletes moving forward.
Yeah, and I have to admit, you guys, there's a piece of me that's like, you know what? I hope and pray that like 5 or 6 years down the road, we're all going to talk about this and we're going to say, hey, remember that crazy year in like 2020 when all the shows got canceled and, they canceled all sports, and all that crap that we had to go to. Remember that? It's kind of like, we'll kind of maybe, recall this in kind of a fond manner. It's like, man, that was freaking nuts, because Lord knows that I'm kind of thinking to myself, boy, I hope that I'm not learning skills that I'm going to have to use in future years, in 2022 when this happens again, or hopefully this is just something that we look back fondly as just like this crazy anomaly that just happened this one time that, we can kind of look at like that time when we slipped and fell and broke our arm and it was like, hey, yeah, remember that when it sucked at the time, but when you can look back at it, like 5 and 10 years later, you can kind of laugh about it, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of the opinion that this kind of thing never happens again, or at least in my lifetime, so
yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of people appreciate this podcast, especially. I could just imagine myself in their shoes. Even with like my own experience, like had I prepped say this year, like I've thought about it, I'm like, oh my God, like that's, whoa, that would have been just different. And a lot of the stuff that I would have known previously, it's like, well, this is kind of sort of out the window, so, or you're gonna have to learn quick, dude. Right. So yeah, any final words for our brothers and sisters who are out there doing their thing in the midst of all this, my experienced fellow bodybuilders?
I feel like we have to at least address our powerlifting, brothers and sisters, right? Bert, if you had anybody in the powerlifting realm that was like ready to compete and their meet got canceled?
I've had two. Yeah, two, maybe, yeah, two, but they're at least well fed, and they get to take a trip down hypertrophy lane, which I think it's going to be helpful in the long run, so that like with him, honestly, it's been especially how competitive powerlifting is. It's just been very, how do I say, it's like a nice little break, because it's like the numbers move up every 6 months, and it's like, oh, okay, I can, like, we're all really not like improving right now, the majority of us anyways. So I think for the powerlifters, it's been a nice break. I think the biggest thing is just been, and it's been addressed already, is like, USAPL nationals and whether that's going to happen and what the qualifiers look like. But yeah, not to say that what they're going through isn't, hard in its own way, but yeah, it's easier when, you have enough body fat on you, I guess, and food.
Yeah, because I can say for myself, like the few athletes that I've had, first of all, the first one had already competed right before the shutdown, and we were looking to like cut a bunch of body weight. Like we needed to get down to like 150 pounds from like 160, I want to say. So that was kind of like that blessing, kind of like having more time. Now we can just we can cruise a little bit, focus on weight loss, not worry about killing yourself in the gym. I'm not going to say a junk, kind of no reason block, but at the same time, we didn't have to push things quite so hard. You know what I mean? And other athletes were just like, oh, okay, cool. You know what? I've got more time now to get ready for the next one. I got more time to get better. I've got more time to get stronger, you know? And so all of that's been met with a fair amount of positivity. I'm just really thankful that I had nobody who was like an advanced lifter who was, you know, like in the peak of their expression and ready to like set all-time PRs. Because, I mean, you talk about that, Bert. I mean, how hard would that be to know that, like, I've been doing this for like 8, 10, 12, 15 years. I'm in a perfect opportunity and a perfect time to set lifetime PRs on this platform, and it ain't happening. You know, it's like, how hard is that to get back again?
Yeah, especially if you don't have equipment, you know, because I mean they're heavily dependent on that. Whereas like our stuff is just, I guess it's not as fun, but we can still, if we're willing to work hard, we can, you know, at the very least maintain like, you know, what our sport requires from us. But with him, it's just like, hey, unless like you got in there and you have the budget for it and you got in there quick before like, you know, we basically broke Rogue. Yeah, it's like you are going to be, you're going to go from that basically to like, it's like, you know, every day it's like, yeah, your 1RM is like trending like downwards, and it's going to be that way until things start back up. So that would be, yeah, that would be very heartbreaking. And I remember there were a few meets, none of my athletes were in them, but you know, some of my friends where they were this close and the block was going really well. And yeah, just like that, it's like, yeah, no meets happening. And now you get to like sit at home and just get weaker every day, basically.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that I wasn't in that position. I didn't have any of my athletes, because I don't know how I would explain that to somebody, you know, because I mean, that's when you've been training that long, that opportunity and that amount of work is going to be far and few between. You know what I mean? So I guess to all, because I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure that there's lifters out there that were in that particular circumstance. And yeah, just a call to those guys, you know, I feel for you. And at the same time, I'd kind of like to hear how that was handled, you know? I guess feel free to email me and let me know how you handled it.
Yeah, they're doing split squats like the rest of us. That's what we're all going to remember about 2020 is just the split squats.
Yeah. Split squats and pull-ups on the trees. Yeah. How about you, Jeff? You got any wise words to leave us with?
I think I'm just going to leave everybody with hopefully that everything that we've kind of touched on, the experiences that we've shared with our athletes, maybe that hopefully can relate with some people out there and it helps them. And if anything, shows in the fall, maybe the timeline's got extended. So now you just get to shop for different brands of shoes. You got more time to tie the shoes.
All those seconds have slowed down now.
You know, your physique and your growth as a person kind of go hand in hand. And even if you have a prep that you look back and like, man, I was just like a total ass. I was irresponsible. Part of that's just like segments of you were exposed that like, again, like the prep kind of help make that clear for you. I know that's the truth for me. It's like when I'm prepping, it's like, oh, okay, you're a shitty person in this way, dude. Okay, good to know. You know, or you need to work on this, and that. No one was signing up for this, but the truth is, like, if you know you're prepping or you did a good chunk of your prep and under these circumstances, you might not realize it now, but in the long term, again, like growth in your physique, improvements in your physique, kind of, you know, they go right alongside, like, if you're doing it right, improvements in you as a person. I think the vast majority of us who've done this long enough kind of see that. Whether you choose to, you know, I guess listen to what you've learned, well, that's a different thing. But the truth is, I think a lot of you guys out there, yeah, you guys are really unfortunate in regards to like how the season unraveled itself. But you guys do have that segment, and like no one can take that away from you guys. So, yeah, just remember that going forward. So,
boom,
yeah,
love it, Bert.
Yeah. So hopefully I'll see some of you guys at some show later in the fall. I can't, like, I never thought I'd say this, but you know how it is. It's a love-hate relationship with like bodybuilding shows. You know you're going to be like messed up for like 2 days after. But yeah, I hope to see some of you guys at some of the good shows across the country. And yeah, hopefully we don't have to stand 6 feet apart. So, yep. So we got for y'all folks. Thank you for tuning in. And this is Jeff, Brad, and Betito, and Andrea in the background supervising us, saying adios.
Hey there, this is Coach Eric Helms. Thanks so much for listening to our show. 3DMJ prides itself on keeping this show, our blog, and our YouTube channel as free and relevant sources of information for our community week after week. We also release additional free video courses as often as possible at 3dmjvault.com. If you'd like to help support our mission and our work, please consider becoming a monthly patron of our endeavors. Go to patreon.com/team3dmj and donate just a couple dollars per month to our cause to help educate and grow the drug-free bodybuilding and powerlifting communities worldwide. You can definitely choose to donate more, and if you do so, we'll send you discount codes for future use on any of our paid products. But any little bit helps, and we appreciate your monthly support in any amount you see fit. So again, you can start assisting the team by going to patreon.com/team3dmj. That's patreon.com/team3dmj. Thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you in the next show.